The text came in while I was helping a customer at my flower shop. I glanced at my phone, expecting it to be a delivery confirmation or maybe a reminder from my husband Daniel about dinner plans. Instead, it was a message that would change everything. "I'm leaving you. I've met someone else. Her name is Lily, and she's 22. We're moving to LA together. Oh, and I emptied our joint account. Good luck, Sarah. You'll need it." My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. I finished wrapping the bouquet of roses for Mrs. Thompson, handed her the change, and smiled as she left the shop. But inside, my mind was racing. Daniel thought he had the upper hand. He thought I'd be devastated, scrambling to pick up the pieces of my life. What he didn't know was that I'd seen this coming for months. The signs had been there, subtle at first, then glaringly obvious. Daniel had started working late, but his paychecks didn't reflect any overtime. He'd changed the password on his phone and started going to the gym religiously, buying new clothes that were a little too tight for his 42-year-old frame. He'd even started using slang that sounded ridiculous coming from a man his age. Then there was the receipt I found 3 months ago, a dinner for two at an expensive restaurant on a night he'd claimed to be working late. That was the moment I knew something was off. I didn't confront him. Instead, I opened a separate bank account at a different bank. A week later, when he suggested combining our accounts to simplify things, I agreed cheerfully, while quietly moving my personal savings to the new account. The joint account he'd just emptied, it had just enough money to keep him from getting suspicious. I didn't respond to Daniel's text. Instead, I called my lawyer, Emily, the one I'd consulted 2 months ago when I found the hotel charges on our credit card statement. "It's time," I said simply. "He just made his move." "The papers are ready," Emily replied. "I'll file them first thing tomorrow. Do you want me to have him served in LA?" I thought for a moment. "No rush. Let him think he's won first." Another text from Daniel came through. "I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little flower shop to keep you busy." My little shop. The one I'd built from scratch. The one that generated more income than his mid-level marketing job. The one whose profits I'd carefully kept separate from our joint finances. I smiled, thinking of the certified letters that would greet him in LA. Let him enjoy his moment of triumph. That evening, I sat in our house, my house, since I'd inherited it from my grandmother, and kept it in my name despite Daniel's repeated suggestions to add him to the deed. While organizing the paperwork Emily would need, I found our wedding album. Daniel looked so different then, before his midlife crisis had turned him into a caricature of his former self. These days, he wore shirts that were too tight, tried too hard to connect with the 20-somethings at his office, and used slang that made him sound like a teenager. My phone buzzed again. "I've been planning this for months. Lily understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone more your own age." I screenshotted each message, adding them to my evidence folder. Emily would love his casual admission of premeditation, his gleeful announcement about emptying our account. Then came the final text. "BTW, I used the joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift, LOL." Perfect. I called the credit card company. "Mrs. Carter speaking. I need to report fraudulent charges and cancel a card immediately." "Of course, ma'am. Can you identify the charges?" "2 first-class tickets to LA booked today. Hotel charges at the Sunset Palms. And I'll need to remove my husband as an authorized user." "Do you have documentation of the fraud?" "Text messages from my husband admitting he used our joint card to book travel with his girlfriend after emptying our bank account. I'll be happy to forward them." The representative's professional tone couldn't quite hide her satisfaction as she canceled the charges. Daniel and Lily would arrive at the airport tomorrow to find their tickets invalidated and their hotel reservation canceled. The next morning, my phone buzzed with increasingly angry texts from Daniel. "What the heck did you do to our credit card? The airline won't honor our tickets." "The hotel canceled our reservation. Answer me." I silenced my phone and headed to my flower shop. Friday was always our busiest day, and I had a new shipment of orchids to unpack. Life goes on, even when your husband runs off with a woman young enough to be his daughter. Around noon, Daniel's mother called. "Sarah, dear, Daniel told us everything about how controlling you've been, how you drove him away. He says you're being vindictive now, causing problems with his travel plans." I put her on speaker while I arranged a window display. "Did he mention emptying our joint account and charging tickets for him and his girlfriend on our credit card?" Silence. Then, "Well, he said you left him no choice, that you'd been cold and distant." "Barbara, I have his texts. Would you like me to read them to you? The one where he bragged about taking our money? Or maybe the one where he mocked my age?" Another pause. "He did seem a bit cruel." I told him that text message was inappropriate. "I appreciate the call, Barbara. I've always liked you. But I think it's best if we end this conversation now. My lawyer has advised minimal contact with Daniel's family during the proceedings." Proceedings? Already? Goodbye, Barbara. The emergency hearing was everything I could have hoped for. Daniel showed up in his new young wardrobe, designer jeans too tight for his age, a blazer that screamed midlife crisis. Lily waited outside, her youth painfully obvious under the harsh courthouse lighting. Emily presented our evidence methodically. Daniel's gleeful text about emptying our account, his credit card fraud, his documented history of hidden expenses. Each piece had been carefully collected over months of quiet observation. "Your Honor," Daniel's hastily hired lawyer attempted, "my client admits to some rash decisions, but Mrs. Carter's actions have been vindictive and calculating." "Calculating?" Emily countered. "You mean prudent? My client protected her separate assets and maintained detailed records of her husband's suspicious behavior. That's not vindictive. That's smart business." The judge reviewed my documentation. The separate property deed to the house, the flower shop's incorporation papers in my name only, the careful separation of business and personal finances that Daniel had always complained about. "Mr. Carter," the judge addressed Daniel directly, "you admitted via text message to deliberately emptying a joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend. Do you deny this?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "I was just trying to make a clean break." "By committing financial fraud?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "And now you're claiming rights to property that documentation shows is clearly separate from marital assets." "The business grew during our marriage." Daniel's lawyer tried again. "The business was established before the marriage," Emily interrupted, "and Mrs. Carter maintained strict separation of business and personal finances throughout. We have documentation of every penny invested and earned." I watched Daniel's face as reality started sinking in. He thought this would be easy. Empty our accounts, run off with his girlfriend, maybe claim half my business in the divorce. He'd never bothered to understand my insistence on keeping things separate, had mocked my careful bookkeeping as obsessive. "The court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct," the judge announced. "All shared assets are frozen pending final dissolution. Mr. Carter is ordered to return any funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. "But that money's gone," Daniel protested. "We spent it on—" "Then I suggest you find a way to replace it," the judge cut him off. "And Mr. Carter, the court takes a very dim view of using shared credit cards to fund adventures with paramours." Outside the courthouse, I heard Lily asking Daniel about their LA plans. His response was lost in the sound of my heels clicking confidently across the marble floor, heading back to the business he'd never understood or respected. The next few weeks brought a string of increasingly desperate moves from Daniel. He tried claiming the flower shop had been his idea, that he'd invested money in its early days. He even suggested he'd been my business partner all along, claims quickly disproven by my meticulous records. "He's getting desperate," Emily observed. "His girlfriend's social media shows they're staying at her studio apartment now. Apparently, living on a receptionist's salary isn't quite the glamorous escape he imagined." Daniel's family started reaching out. their tone markedly different from their initial accusations. "We had no idea," his sister Amanda admitted. "He told us you'd been cold, controlling, that he needed to escape. But then we saw his texts, the way he bragged about taking your money. That's not the brother I thought I knew." His mother called again, this time in tears. "The things he said about your age, about replacing you with someone younger. I raised him better than that. I thought I did anyway." I let their calls go to voicemail. Their support might have meant something weeks ago, but now it felt like rats deserting a sinking ship. The flower shop thrived, ironically boosted by local gossip about my situation. Women started coming in specifically to show support, often leaving with far more than they'd planned to buy. "My ex tried something similar," one customer confided while buying a bouquet of lilies. "Thought he'd take everything in the divorce. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them." My phone still buzzed occasionally with texts from Daniel, his tone swinging between anger and manipulation. "You've ruined everything. I never meant to hurt you. You'll regret being so vindictive." I forwarded each message to Emily without responding. Let him dig his hole deeper. Through the grapevine, I heard Lily was having second thoughts. Apparently, sharing her studio apartment with a middle-aged man who couldn't afford his own place wasn't the romantic adventure she'd imagined. The age gap that had seemed exciting during secret hotel meetings felt different in the harsh light of reality. She posted about toxic relationships and learning from mistakes yesterday, Emily mentioned during an update call, and removed her relationship status this morning. I almost felt sorry for Daniel. Almost. But then I remembered his lol after telling me he'd emptied our account, the casual cruelty of his comments about my age, the way he'd assumed I'd be helpless without him. Instead of pity, I felt something else. Pride. Pride in my foresight, in my quiet strength, in my ability to protect myself while he underestimated. The final divorce hearing painted a very different picture from Daniel's imagined triumph. Gone was his cocky attitude, replaced by barely concealed panic. Lily was noticeably absent. She'd moved on to a coworker her own age, according to office gossip. Daniel had shown up in his old clothes. The designer wardrobe apparently returned to help repay the joint account he'd emptied. "Your Honor," Daniel's lawyer attempted one last time. "Despite the separate property documentation, my client contributed to the growth of his wife's business through moral support and—" "Moral support?" Emily interrupted. "Like these text messages belittling Mrs. Carter's business as a little flower shop? Or these social media posts calling it her hobby?" The judge had clearly seen enough. The final settlement reflected my careful planning. I kept my house, my business, and my separate assets. Daniel got his personal possessions and his car, which was worth less than he owed on it. "You've destroyed me," he hissed as we left the courthouse. "I'll have to move back in with my parents." "No, Daniel," I replied calmly. "You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't destroy me too." His mother was waiting outside, ready to drive him to her house, his new home at 42. The irony of his situation wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd mocked my age was now living in his childhood bedroom, while I continued running my successful business. "You planned this all along," he accused. "You knew this would happen." "No," I said. "I just paid attention. And unlike you, I understood the value of keeping good records." His mother stepped between us. "That's enough, Daniel. You've embarrassed yourself enough already." As they walked away, I heard her start in on him. "Honestly, what were you thinking? A 22-year-old emptying bank accounts? Sending those horrible texts?" I watched them disappear into the parking lot, feeling nothing but relief. Daniel had thought he was writing the ending to our story with that cruel text. Instead, he'd merely set my carefully laid plans in motion. 6 months later, my flower shop had expanded to a second location. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Daniel struggled to rebuild his life, the little shop he'd dismissed was thriving. I'd hired 3 new employees and launched an online store that was gaining traction nationally. News of Daniel's situation trickled back through mutual acquaintances. He'd tried dating apps but found women his age weren't interested in a middle-aged man living with his parents. Younger women, having heard about his history through office gossip, steered clear. Lily had apparently warned her friends about him, sharing screenshots of his desperate attempts to win her back after she'd left. His career suffered too. The company's HR department had launched an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate, resulting in a formal reprimand. The promotion he'd been expecting went to someone else, someone who didn't have a history of inappropriate relationships with reception staff. He tried to claim age discrimination, Amanda told me during an unexpected visit to the shop. Said they were punishing him for dating someone younger. HR just added that complaint to his file. I was surprised to see his sister in my store, but her presence spoke volumes about how thoroughly Daniel had alienated his own family. "I know we didn't support you at first," she admitted, running her fingers over a bouquet of roses. "He played the victim so well, but watching how he handled everything, how he acted afterward, I'm ashamed we ever believed him." Emily kept me updated on Daniel's continued attempts to challenge the divorce settlement. Each petition was denied, his claims of unfair distribution dismissed, based on the evidence of his own actions. He actually tried arguing that his text about emptying the account was just a joke, she told me, laughing. The judge asked if law made theft less illegal. The shop's success brought unexpected validation. Local business magazines wanted to feature my story, not as a scorned wife, but as a savvy businesswoman who'd protected her interests. Young entrepreneurs asked for advice about keeping business and personal finances separate. "The best protection is preparation," I told one young woman who reminded me of Lily, "and always trust your instincts." Daniel's mother called occasionally, usually after he'd done something particularly self-destructive. He'd tried online gambling, hoping for a quick fix to his financial problems. He'd gotten involved with a pyramid scheme that promised fast returns. Each attempt to recover his former lifestyle just dug him deeper into trouble. "I don't know where we went wrong with him," she sighed during one call. "His father and I offered to help him get back on his feet if he'd just take responsibility for his actions, but he's still blaming everyone else. You, Lily, his company, the judge." I listened politely but maintained my distance. Their family drama wasn't my problem anymore. My life had moved forward, filled with plans for a third shop location and a possible expansion into event planning. The only reminder of Daniel's impact on my life was a framed screenshot hanging in my office. His final text before I blocked his number. "Have fun with your little flower shop. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age." Below it sat my latest business award. Proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply succeeding on your own terms.